It's my nerd world, and welcome to it. I am your host, Jon Justice, for another Depeche Mode podcast. On the show this week, Martin Gore's got a brand new solo release. What should the next Depeche Mode album sound like? I'm looking for your views, and I will share mine. Plus, we're going to dive in to your listener feedback. TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. That is the email address, TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. And the website for My Nerd World is mynerdworld.net. I am your host, Jon Justice, and I'm glad you're with the show again this week. And thank you for those that wrote this week and had so many kind comments about the show. I really do appreciate it. If you are a new listener to the show, I would encourage you to go back and listen to, obviously, the previous episodes, but the early episodes from a handful of years ago where I get into detail my own personal history with Depeche Mode. And then moving forward in the podcast, we cover a lot of the new releases. We go through every single album. I give you my thoughts and commentary on it. And now, at this point in time, when it comes to the band and doing the podcast, I have taken some brief time off. I've taken some lengthy time off of doing the show as well. And lately, there's been quite a bit of Depeche Mode news, especially with the most recent introduction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that I've been able to put together with some consistency, some shows. And again, thank you for downloading the show and keeping me motivated. I really do appreciate it. So again, on the show this week, we are going to get into a little bit of Martin's solo release, my thoughts on the Mandrill, the first single from his EP that comes out next year. Also, I was inspired by somebody on Twitter this week, and it actually opened up an avenue of listening to Depeche Mode that I haven't gone down in a while. I mean, like a long while. So I'll talk a little bit about that and get into what I personally think, or what I'd like to have the next Depeche Mode album sound like. I think it's pretty much a given that Depeche Mode's going to be recording a new album. There's been some smattering of indication as such, including some comments that I made on 3 or 4 episodes ago, and I believe in public, Dave Gahan had made a comment about getting back into studio. I think the pandemic has caused a bit of a delay on the band going back in and recording anything, which is understandable, which is probably why Martin has had the ability to go and record a new solo EP or album, depending on what this ends up fully turning into, seeing that doing it by himself makes it easy to adhere to pandemic restrictions depending on where you're living in the world, although it seems like the whole planet is going on lockdown again. So let's start off here. This kind of came as a bit of a surprise. Now, granted, I hadn't been on the Depeche Mode boards in a while. I usually go there like once a week, and I hadn't. If this had been talked about or rumored about, I missed it. But it was last week, after I recorded last week's show, that I started to see some teases for a Martin Gore release. Mute had tweeted out and posted up on Instagram a stylized photo of Martin Gore talking about information coming out this week. So obviously we're getting a bit of a tease that Martin was releasing something. And that coincides rather interestingly with the comments from the band during the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame portion, when they received the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, when Dave had made a comment to Martin about how he needed to get back in studio. I had taken at the time that comment to mean that perhaps he was writing new music for Depeche, which he might be doing, but it also could be the fact that they all know that Martin Gore was working on a new solo release, and then we got some further details on that. I'm going to go ahead and share with you the comments from the Rolling Stone article. Now, granted, there's not a lot of details surrounding this EP, apart from just the details of the EP itself, right? Martin hasn't gotten into a lot of commentary, although there is an interesting quote here from Martin Gore in this Rolling Stone article that I will share with you. So, from Rolling Stone, it says, Depeche Mode's Martin Gore previews new EP with Mandrill, the 5-song instrumental project, The Third Chimpanzee, to arrive in January. Depeche Mode's Martin Gore has announced a new instrumental EP, The Third Chimpanzee, again out on January 29th. Ahead of the release, the songwriter and guitarist, dropped the first offering from the project, Mandrill. It is accompanied by a video that features trippy paintings of the titular animal flashing along with the atmospheric track. The first track I recorded had a sound that wasn't human, Gore said in a statement. That is so Martin Gore, by the way. It just makes me laugh. Just because, I've spent, I think a lot of you have, but we spent so much time with this band, and not just listening to the music, but hanging on every word that they say in interviews, because they are a cautious and guarded band. They always have been. But be that as it may, that is such a very Martin Gore thing to say, that the first track I recorded had a sound that wasn't human. It sounded primate-like. I decided to name it Howler, after a monkey. Then, when it came time to name the EP, I remembered reading the book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Chimpanzee. It all made sense to call it that, as the EP was made by one of the third chimpanzees. I really dig that, by the way, and I won't wipe out on talking about the science fiction novels that I write, except to say that I really like this type of inspiration. I'm moving forward in writing more books in the series EMBARK that I've created, and while the fourth book is edited, I'm about one chapter away from finishing up the fifth book, and I had a title for that book originally, and in the writing process, I like to include music in my stories. As a matter of fact, the first book in my EMBARK series is filled, for those that don't know, with Depeche Mode references. The main character, Taft, is a huge Depeche Mode fan, even though the story is written some 100 years into the future. Be that as it may, my point is that when I was writing the fifth book, I injected some comments about one of the villains in the book listening to a particular rock track. I'm going to leave it a mystery because I don't want to spoil the fun for those that may be fans of the books. But because of that, I ended up renaming the book the title of this particular song because it fits so well with the book. So I just really appreciate this type of inspiration where Martin Gore says that the song sounded primate-like. He decided to name it Howler after a monkey, and then he began to realize, reading this book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Chimpanzee, it all made sense. So all the tracks on the album, right? Howler, Mandrill, Capuchin, Vervet, Howler's End, these are all monkey-chimpanzee-related titles, and I just think the cohesiveness of that is really interesting. And you can certainly get away with it when you're doing an instrumental track, right? The Third Chimpanzee follows Gore's 2015 album, MG. It will be pressed on a limited edition 12-inch blue vinyl, as well as on a CD. Both formats are currently available for pre-order. So, listening to this track, Mandrill, and I'll talk about it here in a moment, it made me want to go revisit MG. The first time listening to MG, I enjoyed it. It's not an album that I go back to and listen to often, although, again, getting back to my writing, I think I'm going to visit this album a little bit more because I remember when, in 2015, Martin released MG, I was writing the first book in my series, and there is a slight cinematic element to that first Martin Gore, that MG album. That was certainly a deviation from VCMG and from the counterfeit cover albums that he did, right? And there's a part of me that almost prefers these instrumental tracks next to the cover albums that he's done. I enjoy Counterfeit 1 and 2, but again, those aren't necessarily albums that I revisit often. Kind of the same with Dave Gaughan's solo work. I enjoy them. These individuals are incredibly talented musicians, singers and songwriters, but for me, for this Depeche Mode fan, they work best together as a group. And there's just something a little bit missing from their solo work. When it comes to Martin Gore, though, his instrumental stuff is really interesting. And MG does have a bit of a sci-fi Blade Runner-esque quality to it. I'm interested to see what the EP sounds like as a whole. I enjoy this track Mandrill quite a bit, but again, I don't know how often I'm going to be going and revisiting it. So I'm interested to see how the rest of this EP ends up sounding, because it does have this bit of a cinematic feel to it that I kind of dig, right? It runs counter to sort of the theming primate theming of the album in and of itself. And I'm very much a visual and audio person, right? And so the visuals with Depeche Mode really speak a lot to the audio of Depeche Mode and the songs that I listen to, and they all sort of create this cohesive sort of vibe that ends up cementing itself as nostalgia for me as albums grow older, as I get older, right? So I'm really curious to hear, obviously, what the rest of this album is going to sound like. I'm not over the moon excited about this. If this was Depeche Mode, or if this was Martin Gore doing a solo album that was a straight-up solo album of him writing songs and singing them, I think I would be a lot more encouraged. Be that it's an instrumental EP, and it sounds a little bit like MG does. I'm looking forward to it, but not like I would be for a Depeche Mode album where I want to get it in my hands right now. Again, it will be pressed on a limited edition 12-inch blue vinyl as well as a CD. Both formats are currently available for pre-order. I was going to play a little bit of Mandrill on the show, but if you've listened to previous Depeche Mode podcasts that I've done, I always get tagged with copyright warnings, and they demonetize my videos on YouTube when I post them. So unfortunately, because of that, I've decided to avoid getting those dings, which is a bit of a bummer because it's a Depeche Mode podcast, and I wish that I could go ahead and actually play Depeche Mode music on the podcast. But because of the copyright issues, I can't afford to do that. But what do you think? I'm assuming you've listened to Mandrill by now. I got to thank Rome Ed, who actually had reached out and sent me the video for it. Thank you very much for that, sir. I really do appreciate it. I like the track. I've listened to it a few times now. I'll probably listen to it again really soon. It's good background music, as is MG and as is VCMG. It has me curious for the rest of this release. But what do you think? TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. Let me know your thoughts, and I will share them with you and answer any questions you might have on an upcoming Depeche Mode podcast. All right, let's move forward. So at Baby Depeche, who has a title of Here Is a House on Twitter, had tweeted out a couple days ago. And they tweeted out this playlist that they had made on Spotify. And I'm always interested to see when Depeche Mode fans go and create their own playlist, right? What songs do they choose? I'm a member of a couple of different Facebook Depeche Mode forums, and people are constantly putting up their favorite live set list or their favorite playlist, and I'm always interested to see what people choose. Before I dive further into what Baby Depeche tweeted and the road that it sent me on, I want to repeat something that I said probably about a year ago or so, and that is that for me personally, there's been a bit of a disservice when it comes to Depeche Mode via the way that we listen to music now. Because of the habits that we have, and because of our iTunes apps and our Spotify's, when I was growing up and I was younger, right, before we had smartphones, you just listened to, it was cassettes, it was albums, it was cassettes, and then it was, CDs after that. And you'd make mixed CDs, okay, you'd make mixed tapes, but when it came to Depeche Mode, I was usually sort of zeroing in on an album at a particular moment in time, so I go and I would grab Violator, or I would grab Ultra, or I would grab Black Celebration. I wasn't really jumping around from different albums depending on the mood that I was in. I would just grab an album and I would go and listen to it. Well, times change, and I think most of us now have playlists on our phone, and me personally, I put together playlists and listen to music that way. And it's been a bit of a disservice, though, because I miss going and just listening to a Depeche Mode album from beginning to end. I think the way that bands and artists have been producing albums as of late, there's been perhaps a little less cohesiveness. I think Depeche Mode's been pretty consistent, but I've noticed with other bands that there's been less of a desire to create a sort of a narrative or an arc within an album like we used to have before you had smartphones and you would go and put together a playlist and tracks. There was a lot of time and care put into the order of tracks, and Thankfully, Depeche Mode has been pretty consistent in doing that with all of their releases, even if we or me as a fan don't listen to the albums that way. So what I'm trying to say is I've really been enjoying going back and just grabbing an album like I used to when I was younger before smartphones and just listening to that particular album as opposed to going and listening to a playlist. And there's, to a certain extent, I feel like that's the way the band kind of meant it to be, to listen to these albums. Even the way that the singles were put out with extra tracks, there was a bit of a method to the tracks that were included on there. Not all the time, but sometimes there were, especially with EPs. So I guess it's a long way of saying, as I get into making mixes, because that's what I want to talk about. It's a long way of saying that if you haven't gone and just listened to Depeche Mode singular albums by themselves front to back, I would encourage you to do so, because you can find yourself sort of reconnecting and rediscovering with the band in a way that perhaps you didn't know that you would or could. And that's what happened with me. Okay, so that's a long way to get to this one tweet and the path that it sent me on. So, @BabyDepeche tweeted this post out, and they had put together this playlist. And as a matter of fact, since I'm talking about it, I have it right here. Let me go ahead and pull it up, because I commented on it because I was really impressed by it. All right, so I'm on my phone. Here we go. So they go by @BabyDepeche, but also Here Is the House, and they put together this playlist on Spotify. So I went and I pulled it up, and let me share with you what the track listing was, because it sent me down just a particular mindset, right? So the track listing was Flexible, Lie to Me, Halo, More Than a Party, Little Soul, Martyr, Now This Is Fun, Light, Long Time Lie, Nothing to Fear, Stories of Old, Miles Away, Truth Is. There was something about this particular playlist that stuck out. It was such an eclectic mix of Depeche Mode, and yet there isn't anything about it that I would go and change. I mean, I looked at them and go, man, this is a playlist that I'd actually want to listen to. Even though it includes a couple of songs that I'm not the biggest fan of. Miles Away, The Truth Is just okay in my book. Little So is just okay in my book. But seeing the order at which @BabyDepeche had pieced them together just really stuck out to me. So this sent me down a path of listening to older Depeche Mode. And I've really been focused on the past probably 10 years listening to Depeche Mode from Music for the Masses, Black Celebration on. The deepest that I would go and spend any amount of time listening to was kind of Some Great Reward. I had really pushed everything pre-Some Great Reward off to the side and had been listening to everything afterwards with a lot of focus on that trilogy that I talk about so much for me personally of Music for the Masses, Violator, and Songs of Faith and Devotion. But seeing this playlist, and especially listening to Now This Is Fun, and I talked about this on last week's show, I got this nostalgic vibe that I hadn't pulled from Depeche Mode in a long time. So it made me want to go and revisit some of their older music. So I put together my own playlist this morning. I got it this morning, and I was doing some posting I'm running a special on my EMBARK book right now. The ebook is free. If you want to go to Amazon.com and search for Jon Justice, or to mynerdworld.net, you can link to it from there. But if you're a sci-fi fan and a Depeche Mode fan listening to this podcast, you should definitely check out the first book in my series, and right now the ebook's available for free. So I went into iTunes and went through all the early albums and EPs and single releases that the band put out there, and I pieced together this playlist. Dreaming of Me, New Life, Fools, the single version, Shame, In Your Memory, the single version, Ice Machine, Set Me Free, Remotivate Me, Flexible, Now This Is Fun, Shout, The Sun and the Rainfall, It's Called a Heart, Christmas Island, and If You Want. And this was one of the most... Now, again, this runs counter to what I was saying about listening to Depeche Mode albums in their entirety. But listening to these songs and sitting down this morning doing some of my my book promotion work was one of the most enjoyable experiences that I had listening to Depeche Mode in a long, long time. It really reconnected me with their earlier work that I had unintentionally distanced myself from. And it got me wondering, and this is what I'm driving at. So first off, thank you to Baby Depeche Mode for posting that out. I know you didn't have that intention, but man, it just sent me down this path. It got me wondering about the next Depeche Mode release. And I think there's an opportunity here. There's an opportunity here because as of late, when it comes to new music that I've personally been listening to, I've become a big fan of the synthwave genre. And I didn't even know there was a synthwave genre. This was something just completely new to me. I had stumbled across this band called Gunship. It's these three guys, and they make this amazing electronic-based, 80s-tinged music. And it's just fantastic. I fell in love with their stuff. And I went down this road of finding these synthwave bands. Gunship being one of them, Metric being another one, Laserhawk, Ghost, League of Legends, Home. I'm looking at a playlist right here. Carpenter Brute is another one, Carpenter Brute. I dig him a lot as well. And it really got me wondering if perhaps Depeche Mode and their next release may not have a retro sound to it. So the evidence of this happening is I don't have any. Except to say this. Martin Gore has always been influenced, at least in my opinion, has always been influenced in one way, in one way, shape, or form by the music of the day. I know that when Songs of Faith and Devotion came out, he wanted to do something. Well, Dave obviously wanted to do something more rock-based, but Martin wanted to push back against the electronic music at the time, either intentionally or unintentionally. This was at the height of sort of your techno, your drum and bass, and Martin decided to go more of this rock route. But with this synthwave genre of music, not all that dissimilar from what is it, EBM, electronic-based music, EBM music. Boy, I'm really showing my age, aren't I? I'm just wondering if there isn't a way that Depeche Mode could create their next album and give it more of a stripped-down, retro Depeche Mode sound, getting away from some of the blues rock that's really dominated the last few albums. I know for me personally, I would really love to hear that. I don't need a Violator 2. I don't need a Music for the Masses 2. But I would really like to see Depeche Mode today go back to A Broken Frame, go back to Construction Time Again, go back to Some Great Reward, even play a little bit with, Speak and Spell, just in terms of getting back to the basics of the instrumentation, stripping away some of the guitar, some of the blues edge that's really dominated these last couple of albums. To a lesser extent, Spirit, right? I think Spirit was probably more electronic than a couple of their previous releases, apart from, say, Sounds of the Universe. Even though that album I really, really enjoy, I think kind of went over the top when it came to the amount of electronic instrumentation and the analog synths that they were using. So I'm wondering if maybe Martin Gore wouldn't be so inclined to tap into the current millennial generation's affinity for electronic music and give us a Depeche Mode album that really harkens back to their earlier work with a modern technology edge to it. I think that could be really, really interesting. I know there's a lot of people that want to see Alan Wilder come back. I would love that too. I think there's a cinematic element to Depeche Mode music that's been lacking ever since he left. And as a matter of fact, a friend of the show, Chuck, has even put together a petition for you to sign, where he's encouraging people to sign it to encourage Alan Wilder to come back to the band. And it's in the link for the podcast this week. For those that want to go check it out in the notes for the podcast this week, you can hit the link and go and sign that. And there's a listener feedback email from Chuck that's in here that I'll share with you here in just a moment. But what would you like to hear? What are your thoughts on perhaps Depeche Mode going back and tapping into the roots, to the 80s, and the way that they made music, and giving us something that had a lyrical modern feel to it with modern technology, but a really more stripped down electronic based, less blues guitar, less live drum aspect than what we've been getting. I think that could be really, really interesting, and could potentially elevate the band with the millennial generation that perhaps knows of them, but maybe isn't as inclined to listen to their more recent releases simply because it doesn't sound like the music that they're really enjoying, that is really retro to what we were growing up with, right? The synthwave movement that's out there right now. If you haven't checked out Gunship, by the way, I would really encourage you to go and do so. It's some really spectacular music. The songwriting's really great, and it's one of the few bands that I've discovered, I don't know, man, in the past 20 years that really gives me that kind of Depeche Mode excitement. Nobody will ever do what Depeche Mode does, but Gunship does a really, really good job of sort of tapping into the musical quality of Depeche Mode that I enjoy, along with that lyrical content. And I think if you're a Depeche Mode fan, you'd really dig some of their stuff. So TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Let me know what you think, and I will read and comment on your emails, like I said, during the next show. Speaking of TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, got a couple of listener feedback emails for you. The first one comes from Micah, who says this: is there any more info on a new album they're working on? Nope, not apart from everything that I mentioned to you already during the podcast. I hope they get a decent producer. The production on the last album was decent, but it sounded rushed. Interesting. It seems that the versions that they released later, going backwards deluxe, had better production. Before that, Delta Machine was horribly produced, with percussion that sounded like it came off an $80 Casio keyboard. Sounds of the Universe was a little better than Delta, but not by much with the bleeps and bloops and blips that Hillier seems addicted to. Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. For example, I know a lot of people are huge fans of Playing the Angel, and I like that album, and I know the intent was, if you watch the documentary for Playing the Angel, Ben Hillier, the producer for that record and many of the more recent albums, apart from the latest one, Spirit, he even made the comment that with Playing the Angel, he wanted something that was crunchier than what they had done previously beforehand, right? When creating that album. And I don't know, that just didn't work for me. Like, I remember hearing him make that comment and thinking maybe we were getting something a little bit more in line with Songs of Faith and Devotion, but it just didn't hit the mark of sort of grabbing me in the same way that Songs of Faith and Devotion did. That album's really interesting to me. I love Songs of Faith and Devotion. It's one of my favorite albums by Depeche Mode and of all time. That album's really interesting to me, especially when you just pair it up with Violator, because there are so many similarities between those two albums, and yet they are so different. They really do complement each other really, really well. I remember loving the fact that we came off of this album Violator that just pushed the band to new heights, and the expectation was so high for Songs of Faith and Devotion. And then we get Songs of Faith and Devotion, and not only is it a masterpiece, but it's wholly different than Violator while still feeling like the follow-up to Violator. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a better example. Maybe I've used this before, and I used this when I was going through, when I was doing a podcast for every album. But it really is kind of like that comparing of Star Wars, because I'm a big Star Wars fan. I do a Star Wars podcast, if you didn't know. Comparing Star Wars to The Empire Strikes Back, right? They feel the same, but they just, one raises the other one. They really complement each other really well. Even though they're within the same universe and they flow together, they're two very different movies. To another extent, I think you can even, continuing with the Star Wars analogies, you can make the same sort of comparison when you look at Star Wars The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. Violator is to Force Awakens what The Last Jedi is to Songs of Faith and Devotion. I'm a Last Jedi fan, by the way. I like all the sequels, so don't hate me because of that. So yeah, Mike, I'm kind of with you. I'd like to see them take their time with a release, but I'd like to see something that was just a little bit more stripped down, a little bit more retro, like I said before. But thank you so much for the email. I appreciate it. All right, Chuck writes, John, I'm so disappointed. When I saw your new Modecast, I got so excited. I thought you were going to plug my petition for Alan Wilder to produce their next album. And then I listened and I waited for it, and I got almost at the end and I realized you weren't going to mention it. But that's okay. Maybe you forgot, and the next show you can help me get the word out. I still love you as a DM brother, and I hope you have a second to sign this petition. Anyways, thanks for the new show. I just want the magic and the feeling of the sound that they've been missing since Alan Wilder left, and I know you do too. I really appreciate your help to make this successful, so please help the cause. Take care. Hashtag Alan Wilder to produce their next album. So yeah, Chuck, honestly, I completely spaced what I did last week's show. That's all that happened with that. I take the emails that I get and then I put them into my notepad for the notes for the show. And then I do the show. And sometimes I miss a copy and paste, and that's what happened last week. So, again, for everybody listening, go and sign. If you want to see Alan Wilder produce the next Depeche Mode album, I would encourage you to go into the notes for this week's show. You'll see there, sign the Alan Wilder petition, and the link is right there in the notes. If you Google it, too, you can find it there as well. But it is in the notes for the show. And sorry about that, Chuck. Hopefully we get a few more signatures this week from your petition. All right, and that wraps up this week's show. Thank you so much for taking some time out to listen. I really do appreciate it. I hope you enjoy listening to the show as much as I do recording it. I know a lot of you guys have been sending in thoughts for future podcasts and what we can talk about, and I'm definitely going to take those ideas and run with them. Whether it's looking at live releases, whether it's looking at B-sides, those are all things that I have planned for the upcoming year. So thank you so much for those suggestions. I really do appreciate it. Before I let you go, I do want to encourage you to go to my website, mynerdworld.net, where you can find out all things about my nerd world. There's a nerd blog where I post somewhat consistently, depending on what's happening in the world right now, which is really weird and frustrating. Also, all the information about my science fiction space opera books. The first 3 books in my EMBARK space opera series are available right now. Book 1, EMBARK. Book 2, EMBARK Treasure in Darkness. And Book 3, The Vanishing War, which completes the opening trilogy. But there are more books on the horizon. Book 4 will be released in about a month. And then next year, 3 more new books in this series. Again, if you're a Depeche Mode fan, obviously, and if you're a science fiction fan and a reader, you're really going to enjoy these books. So go to mynerdworld.net, get more information, or go to amazon.com and search for Jon, Jon Justice. And if you're listening to this on Saturday or Sunday, you can pick up EMBARK Book 1 for free. So go and check it out, especially if you're a science fiction fan. There's a ton of Depeche Mode references in Book 1, and I really do know that you'll enjoy it. So go pick up your free copy for you and a friend, and be sure that after you've read it, to head on over to amazon.com and leave a positive review. It would really mean the world to me. All right, that's it. I'll be back sometime in the near future, hopefully next week with another Depeche Mode podcast. Until then, I hope wherever you are happy, you are safe, and I'd be curious too. Email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. What are you listening to right now from Depeche Mode? And, of course, what are your thoughts on the Third Chimpanzee and Mandrill, the first track from Martin Gore's record? You excited for it? Are you kind of meh? Curious to know what your thoughts are. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Talk to you again real soon. Bye.
My Nerd World.